The gunshot echoed across the Montana Valley like a crack of doom, sending Olivia Rose stumbling through the tall grass with tears streaming down her dust-stained cheeks. It was 1876, and she had just buried everything she thought her life would be in a shallow grave behind her homestead. The last words her husband Richard had spoken to her that morning hung in the air like ghosts. "I'll be back before sundown, Livy." He never returned. Olivia paused at the edge of the property, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The settlers around these parts had warned them about the land disputes, about the cattle barons who wouldn't take kindly to homesteaders, claiming what they considered their grazing territory. Richard had scoffed at their concerns, convinced his Winchester and determination would be protection enough. Now, 3 days after finding his body riddled with bullets by the creek, Olivia was running with nothing but the clothes on her back and her wedding band. The sound of hooves thundered behind her. They were coming back to finish the job, to burn down what was left of her home and erase any evidence of their crime. Olivia ducked into a thicket of cottonwoods, pressing her thin frame against the rough bark as riders galloped past. Through the leaves, she glimpsed the emblem of the Double R Ranch, the same brand she'd seen on the cattle that had trampled her vegetable garden last month. When the riders disappeared over the ridge, Olivia continued her desperate journey toward the town of Eagles Pass. It was 15 miles of rough country, but her only hope for survival. As night fell, she took shelter in a shallow cave, her body trembling with cold and grief. Sleep eluded her as memories of Richard assaulted her mind, his laugh, his touch, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The sobs came unbidden, violent spasms that shook her slender frame until exhaustion finally claimed her. Dawn broke over the Montana wilderness, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Yancy Blackburn guided his horse through the rocky terrain with the confidence of a man who knew every inch of this country. At 32, he had spent most of his life on horseback, working cattle drives from Texas to Montana. His weathered face bore the marks of years under the harsh western sun, and his eyes sharp as a hawk's missed little. The sound caught his attention, first a soft, muffled sobbing coming from a small cave entrance ahead. Yancy dismounted, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver on his hip. In these parts, caution was second nature. He approached quietly, leading his horse behind him. "Hello there," he called out, keeping his distance. "You all right?" The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by silence. "I mean no harm," Yancy continued, his voice low and steady. "Just passing through and heard someone in distress." A woman's face appeared at the cave entrance, eyes red-rimmed and wary. Her once neat brown hair hung in tangles around her shoulders, and her dress was torn and muddied. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse from crying. Yancy raised his hand slowly. "Madam, I'm not looking for trouble, just offering help if you need it." Olivia studied the stranger, tall and lean, with dark hair beneath a well-worn hat. He didn't look like one of the Double R men. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but his eyes held no malice, just curiosity and something that might have been concern. "They killed my husband," she said flatly, not knowing why she was telling this to a stranger. 3 days ago, Double R ranchmen." Yancy's expression hardened. "The Double R? Blake Rutherford's outfit?" Olivia nodded, stepping cautiously from the cave. "We were homesteading, had papers and everything. They didn't care." "Blake Rutherford doesn't recognize anything but his own claim to this territory," Yancy said grimly. "I've heard stories about his methods." "They'll kill me too if they find me," Olivia said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I'm heading for Eagles Pass." Yancy ran a hand along his jaw, considering. He'd planned to continue north to the Nelson Ranch where work awaited him, but the thought of leaving this woman to traverse 15 miles of rough country alone didn't sit right with him. "Eagles Pass is a hard journey on foot," he said finally. "I can take you there. My horse can carry double for that distance." Olivia hesitated, weighing her limited options. Trust didn't come easily after what she'd witnessed, but neither did she fancy her chances alone. "Why would you help me?" she asked bluntly. Because it's what decent folks do, Yancy replied simply, and because I've no love for the double R myself. Something in his straightforward answer convinced her. With a slight nod, Olivia gathered her skirts and approached. I'm Olivia Rose, she said, extending a trembling hand. Yancy Blackburn, he replied, taking her hand briefly. Let's get you to safety, Mrs. Rose. The journey to Eagle's Pass was largely silent, with Olivia seated behind Yancy on his sturdy buckskin gelding. She held herself rigidly, touching him only where necessary to maintain her balance. Whenever they stopped to rest the horse, Yancy noticed how her eyes would grow distant and silent tears would track down her face. By late afternoon, the small settlement of Eagle's Pass came into view, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the stage road. Yancy felt Olivia's body tense behind him. Where should I take you? He asked, glancing over his shoulder. I don't know, she admitted, her voice small. I don't know anyone here. Yancy frowned. He couldn't simply leave her with nowhere to go. There's a boarding house run by a widow named Pearson. Decent place. I can take you there. The boarding house was a 2-story clapboard building painted a fading yellow. Mrs. Pearson, a stout woman with sharp eyes, looked Olivia up and down suspiciously when Yancy explained the situation. I can pay, Olivia said quickly, pulling a small pouch from her pocket. I grabbed what money we had before I ran. Mrs. Pearson's expression softened slightly. You'll be needing work if you plan to stay in Eagle's Pass. I can cook, sew, clean whatever's needed, Olivia replied with a hint of desperation. The general store might be hiring, Mrs. Pearson said thoughtfully. Owner's wife just had her 3rd baby. Could use the help. Yancy cleared his throat. I'll be staying in town tonight. Need to pick up supplies before heading north. He tipped his hat to both women. Mrs. Rose, I wish you well. Olivia watched him walk away, suddenly feeling abandoned all over again. This stranger had been her only connection to safety, and now he too was leaving. Mrs. Pearson showed her to a small, clean room on the 2nd floor. Bath's at the end of the hall. I'll bring up some hot water and a clean nightgown you can borrow. Alone in the sparse room, Olivia sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to truly feel the enormity of what had happened. Richard was gone. Their dreams of building a life together, of raising children on their own land, all shattered in an instant of violence. The sobs came unbidden, racking her body until she could barely breathe. That's how Mrs. Pearson found her moments later, curled into herself on the bed, weeping as though her heart would break. The older woman set down the steaming water and linen, placing a gentle hand on Olivia's shoulder. There, there, child, let it out. The world's a cruel place, but you'll find your strength. You will. Yancy sat in the corner of the Eagle's Nest saloon, nursing a whiskey and mulling over his encounter with the grieving widow. He'd heard enough about Blake Rutherford to know the cattle baron wouldn't stop at just running off homesteaders. If Olivia had witnessed the murder of her husband, she was a loose end Rutherford wouldn't tolerate. Didn't expect to see you in these parts, Blackburn, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Yancy looked up to see Sheriff Tom Miller standing before his table, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. The lawman was in his 50s with a salt and pepper mustache and the weary eyes of a man who'd seen too much. Just passing through, Sheriff. Heading to the Nelson spread tomorrow. Miller pulled out a chair and sat uninvited. Heard you rode in with a woman. Mighty unusual company for you. News traveled fast in small towns. Yancy took another sip of whiskey before answering. Found her hiding in the hills. Says her husband was killed by double R men, homesteaders. The sheriff's expression darkened. That'd be the Rose place, I reckon. Word came in yesterday about some trouble out that way. You investigating? Yancy asked pointedly. Miller gave him a tired look. You know how things stand with Rutherford in this county, Blackburn. Man's got half the territorial officials in his pocket. So justice takes a holiday when the double R is involved? Watch your tone, cowboy. I do what I can with what I've got. Miller leaned forward. But I'd suggest your lady friend keep her head down. Rutherford doesn't leave witnesses. As the sheriff walked away, Yancy stared into his glass, his decision already forming. The Nelson Ranch would have to wait. He couldn't leave Olivia Rose unprotected in Eagles Pass, with Rutherford's influence reaching even into the law. Morning found Olivia at the general store, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged a display of canned goods. Mr. Hollister, the proprietor, had agreed to give her a trial period helping around the store. The work was a welcome distraction from her grief, though every now and then a memory would ambush her. Richard laughing as they planned where to plant apple trees. Richard teaching her to shoot his revolver just in case. Richard's blood soaking into the Montana soil. "You're doing fine work there. Mrs. Rose," Mr. Hollister said approvingly, breaking into her thoughts. "Got a good eye for arrangement." "Thank you, sir," she replied, forcing a small smile. The bell above the door jingled, and Olivia looked up to see Yancy Blackburn entering the store. Her heart gave an unexpected lurch relief, she told herself, nothing more. "Mr. Blackburn," she greeted him, smoothing her borrowed dress nervously. "I thought you'd be gone by now." "Change of plans," he said simply, his eyes scanning the store before returning to her face. "Thought I'd check how you're settling in." "Mrs. Rose is proving quite capable," Mr. Hollister interjected cheerfully. "Might become a permanent fixture if she keeps up the good work." Yancy nodded but seemed distracted. "Mrs. Rose, might I have a word? Outside?" Olivia glanced at Mr. Hollister, who waved her off. "Go ahead. Not busy this morning anyway." Outside, Yancy guided her a few steps away from the store entrance. His expression was grim. "I spoke with the sheriff last night," he began without preamble. "He knows about what happened at your homestead, but he's not likely to pursue it. Rutherford has too much influence." Olivia's face paled. "So my husband's killers just go free. Is that justice in Montana territory?" "It's not right, but it's the way things stand," Yancy said quietly. "There's more. If Rutherford thinks you can identify any of his men, you're in danger even here." The realization washed over her like cold water. "What am I supposed to do? Where can I go?" Yancy shifted uncomfortably. "I've been thinking on that. I'm heading north to the Nelson Ranch. Old Jacob Nelson is a good man. Needs a housekeeper since his wife passed last winter. It's far enough from Rutherford's territory that you'd be safer there." Olivia blinked in surprise. "You want me to go with you? To work for a stranger?" "It's just an option," Yancy said. "Better than waiting around for Rutherford's men to find you." "I hardly know you, Mr. Blackburn," Olivia said, though with less conviction than she felt. "No, you don't," he agreed. "But I'm offering you protection and honest work. I'll be working the ranch too, so you won't be alone with Nelson." Olivia looked down the dusty main street of Eagles Pass, weighing her limited options. Stay here, constantly looking over her shoulder, or trust this taciturn cowboy and seek safety further north. "When would we leave?" she asked finally. "First light tomorrow. I've got supplies to gather today." Olivia nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. Meet me at the boarding house this evening, and I'll give you my answer." As Yancy walked away, Olivia returned to the store with her mind in turmoil. The thought of leaving with a man she barely knew was frightening, but the alternative waiting for Rutherford's men to silence her was worse. That evening, as Olivia sat in her room at the boarding house, a commotion in the street drew her to the window. 2 riders were dismounting in front of the saloon across the way. Even in the fading light, she recognized the double R brand on their horses' flanks. Her breath caught in her throat as one of the men looked up, his face instantly recognizable. He'd been among those who'd confronted Richard that fatal day. A soft knock at her door made her jump. "Mrs. Rose?" "It's Yancy Blackburn." With shaking hands, she opened the door. "They're here," she whispered, her face ashen. "Double R men. I recognized one of them." Yancy's expression hardened. "Did they see you?" "I don't think so. Not yet." He glanced down the hallway, his mind working quickly. "Pack your things. We're leaving now under cover of darkness." "But I thought—" "Plans change," he cut her off. "Those men aren't here by coincidence. Be ready in 5 minutes." True to his word, 5 minutes later, Yancy returned, having settled his bill with Mrs. Pearson and arranged for their quiet departure through the back door of the boarding house. His horse was waiting in the alley, already loaded with supplies. "We'll have to ride double until we can get you a mount of your own," he said, helping Olivia up before swinging into the saddle behind her. "Keep your head down as we pass the saloon." They rode out of town at a walking pace to avoid attention, Yancy taking a circuitous route that kept them away from the main street. Only when Eagles Pass was well behind them did he urge the horse to a trot, heading north under a canopy of stars. "I'm sorry to rush you like this," he said after they'd been riding for an hour, "but I couldn't risk them spotting you." "You saved my life," Olivia replied softly. "Again. Don't thank me yet. We've got 3 days hard riding ahead of us." They made camp that night in a protected hollow, with Yancy insisting Olivia take his bedroll while he kept watch. As she drifted off to exhausted sleep, Olivia found herself studying the cowboy's profile silhouetted against the night sky. There was something reassuring about his quiet presence, a steadiness she desperately needed amid the chaos her life had become. Yet, even as her body surrendered to exhaustion, her dreams were haunted by Richard. His smile, his voice, his broken body lying by the creek. She woke with tears streaming down her face, a keening sound escaping her throat before she could stifle it. Yancy was beside her instantly, concern etched on his features. "Mrs. Rose, are you all right?" "I'm sorry," she gasped, trying to regain control. "The dreams. I see him dying over and over." Yancy hesitated, then awkwardly patted her shoulder. "It's natural to grieve. Don't apologize for it." "Will it ever stop hurting like this?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. "The sharp edges dull with time," he said after a long moment. "At least, that's what folks say." Olivia wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "You speak like a man who knows loss." "Everyone out here knows loss, Mrs. Rose," he replied, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. "Try to get some more rest. Dawn's still a few hours off." The next 3 days established a rhythm riding from first light until dusk, making camp in sheltered locations, sharing simple meals of beans, jerky, and coffee. Yancy remained respectfully distant, speaking little but always watchful, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for potential threats. On the afternoon of the third day, they crested a hill to see a sprawling ranch nestled in a green valley below. Several outbuildings surrounded a substantial log house, with corrals and a barn completing the picture. "The Nelson Ranch," Yancy announced, "one of the finest spreads in northern Montana territory." Olivia felt a flutter of anxiety. "What if Mr. Nelson doesn't want me here?" "Jacob Nelson is a fair man," Yancy assured her, "and he's been looking for help since his wife passed. Besides, he owes me a favor or two." As they approached the ranch house, a tall, white-haired man emerged onto the porch, a shotgun held casually in the crook of his arm. When he recognized Yancy, his weathered face broke into a smile. "Well, I'll be damned, Yancy Blackburn as I live and breathe," he called out, setting the shotgun aside. "Thought you weren't due for another week." "Change of plans, Jacob," Yancy replied, dismounting and helping Olivia down. "Hope that job offer still stands." "Course it does," Jacob Nelson said, his curious gaze shifting to Olivia. "And who might this lovely lady be?" Yancy quickly explained Olivia's situation, though he kept the details vague, mentioning only that she was a widow in need of work and safe haven. Jacob listened gravely, his kind eyes never leaving Olivia's face. "Any friend of Yancy's is welcome here, Mrs. Rose," he said when Yancy finished, "and I've been needing help with the house, something fierce. Can't cook worth a damn, and the boys are tired of my attempts." Relief washed over Olivia. "I'm a good cook, Mr. Nelson, and I can clean, mend, whatever you need." "Then you've got yourself a place," Jacob said warmly. "Come on inside. You both look done in." The Nelson Ranch house was spacious and well built, though clearly in need of a woman's touch. Dust had accumulated on surfaces, and the furniture arrangement spoke of practicality rather than comfort. Jacob showed Olivia to a small but pleasant bedroom off the kitchen. "Was my daughter's room before she married and moved east," he explained, Been empty too long. Do what you want to make it yours. That evening, Olivia prepared her first meal for the ranch, a simple but hearty stew with biscuits that had the ranch hands groaning with appreciation. "Lord Almighty, we've been saved," one of them declared, helping himself to seconds. "No offense to the boss, but his cooking was likely to kill us before winter." Jacob chuckled good-naturedly. "Truth hurts, but I can't argue with it. Mrs. Rose, you've earned your keep already." Yancy ate quietly, watching Olivia move around the kitchen with growing confidence. Something inside him warmed at seeing her momentarily distracted from her grief, focused on the simple task of feeding hungry men. When she caught his eye across the table, he offered a small nod of approval that brought a faint blush to her cheeks. That night, alone in her new room, Olivia allowed herself to reflect on the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been a happily married homesteader with dreams of building a future. Now she was a widow, working as a housekeeper on a distant ranch, dependent on the kindness of strangers. The loss of Richard still ached like a physical wound, but exhaustion soon claimed her, and she slept dreamlessly for the first time since his death. The following weeks established a routine. Olivia rose early to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent the mornings cleaning and baking, the afternoons tending to mending and laundry, and the evenings preparing dinner. The physical labor was a blessing, keeping her hands busy and her mind occupied. Yet night after night, when the work was done and she was alone in her room, the grief would return like a tide, and she would weep silently into her pillow. Yancy, meanwhile, threw himself into ranch work, spending long days in the saddle helping to move cattle to summer pastures and repair fences damaged by spring floods. He would return each evening covered in dust and sweat, but his eyes would invariably seek out Olivia, checking on her welfare without words. One evening, about a month after their arrival, Olivia was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard one of the ranch hands speaking to Yancy near the corral. "She still cries for him," the man said, not unkindly. "Every night. Walls are thin in the bunkhouse, we can hear her." Olivia froze, mortified that her private grief had been so exposed. "Poor woman," another voice added. "Might be better if she moved on, found another man. Life's too short out here to spend it mourning." "She'll move on when she's ready," came Yancy's firm reply. "And not a moment before." "Just saying, a young widow like that won't lack for suitors once word gets around," the first man continued. "Pretty thing like her shouldn't be alone." "She ain't alone," Yancy said sharply. "She's got people looking out for her right here." "She still cries for him," the hand repeated, almost warning. There was a pause, and then Yancy's voice, lower but still clear in the evening air. "Then I'll hold her through it." The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet conviction, sent an unexpected shiver through Olivia. She hadn't considered that Yancy might harbor feelings beyond protective duty toward her. The realization both unsettled and comforted her. That night, her tears came as they always did. But this time, she found herself wondering about the taciturn cowboy who had risked his life to save hers. What losses had shaped him? Why had he really stayed in Eagles Pass that day, instead of continuing to the Nelson Ranch as planned? The next morning broke clear and bright, promising a hot summer day. Olivia was kneading dough for the day's bread when Jacob Nelson entered the kitchen, his expression troubled. "Got a letter from the sheriff in Eagles Pass," he announced without preamble. "Blake Rutherford's been asking questions about you, Mrs. Rose. Seems he's not willing to let matters lie." Olivia's hand stilled in the dough. "What kind of questions?" "Where you might have gone, who you might be with," Jacob replied grimly. "Sheriff Miller didn't tell him anything, but Rutherford's offering a reward now for information." Fear, cold and familiar, crept back into Olivia's heart. "I've brought danger to your home. I should leave." "Nonsense," Jacob said firmly. "Rutherford has no power this far north. But we should be cautious. No trips to town for you for a while, and we'll keep an eye out for strangers." When Yancy returned for the midday meal, Jacob pulled him aside to share the news. Olivia watched through the kitchen window as the cowboy's expression darkened, his hand unconsciously moving to the revolver at his hip. That afternoon, as Olivia was gathering eggs from the hen house, Yancy appeared in the doorway, blocking the sunlight. "Jacob told you about Rutherford?" he asked without preamble. Olivia nodded, carefully placing another egg in her basket. "He says I should stay close to the ranch." "He's right," Yancy agreed. "But there's something else we need to consider. If Rutherford's determined enough to track you here, we might need a more permanent solution." "What do you mean?" Yancy shifted uncomfortably. "The law in these parts, it respects certain boundaries. A woman alone is vulnerable in ways a married woman isn't." Olivia's eyes widened as his meaning became clear. "Are you suggesting a marriage of convenience?" Yancy said quickly. "Nothing more. As my wife, you'd have certain protections. Rutherford would have to go through me to get to you, and legally, that's a different matter entirely." "Mr. Blackburn, it's just a suggestion," he interrupted, his voice gruffer than usual. "Something to consider if things get worse. I wouldn't expect. That is, it would be in name only." Olivia stared at him, this man who had already risked so much for her safety. The idea was shocking, yet she couldn't deny the practical wisdom behind it. Still, her heart rebelled at the thought of replacing Richard so soon, even in name only. "I need time to think," she said finally. Yancy nodded, seeming relieved the conversation was over. "Of course, it's just an option. Nothing needs to be decided now." As he walked away, Olivia found herself studying him with new eyes. Yancy Blackburn was not a handsome man in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his lean strength and quiet dignity. He had been nothing but respectful toward her, keeping a proper distance even as he protected her. Could she consider binding her life to his, even as a matter of practicality? The question haunted her through the evening chores and into the night. Richard's face still came to her in dreams, but increasingly, she found herself wondering what future remained for her. The homestead was lost, her husband gone, her safety still precarious. A practical arrangement with Yancy might offer protection, but could she bear to enter another marriage without love? The decision was postponed by events beyond their control. 3 days later, a rider came thundering into the ranch yard, his horse lathered and blowing hard. It was one of Jacob's hands who had been to town for supplies. "Strangers asking questions in town," he reported breathlessly. 3 men, well armed, showing a drawing of Mrs. Rose and offering good money for information. Jacob's face darkened. "Double R men?" "Didn't say, but they had that look about them. Hired guns." Yancy, who had been repairing tack nearby, rose to his feet. "How far behind you?" "Hour, maybe less. I took the back trails, but they'll figure it out soon enough." Jacob turned to Olivia, who stood frozen on the porch. "Get inside Mrs. Rose. Pack only what you need. You too, Yancy. Take the north trail through the high country. My sister's place in Fort Benton will take you in." "I can't ask you to risk," Olivia began, but Jacob cut her off. "Not asking. Now move, both of you. I'll handle our visitors." Inside, Olivia's hands shook as she gathered her few belongings. The peace she had found at the Nelson Ranch was shattered, and once again she was running for her life. When Yancy appeared at her door, his face grim and determined, something inside her broke. "This will never end, will it?" she whispered. "They'll keep hunting me." "Not if I can help it," Yancy replied, his voice hard as iron. "We leave in 5 minutes. Jacob's preparing horses and supplies." They slipped out the back of the ranch house and made their way to the barn, where Jacob was saddling 2 horses. He handed Yancy a rifle and ammunition. "Northern trail's your best bet. It's rough going, but they won't expect it. My sister will keep you safe until you figure out your next move." Yancy clasped the older man's hand. "We owe you, Jacob." "Just live to tell about it," Jacob replied with a tight smile. "Now get going. I'll send them on a wild goose chase south." They rode hard for the first few hours, following a barely visible trail that wound up into the mountains north of the ranch. Yancy set a grueling pace, pushing the horses as much as he dared on the rough terrain. Only when they reached a high meadow with a clear view of the valley below did he finally call a halt. "We'll rest the horses here," he said, dismounting and helping Olivia down. "No sign of pursuit yet." Olivia sank to the ground, her body aching from the hard ride. "How far to Fort Benton?" "3 days if we push it," Yancy replied, scanning the horizon. "2 if we're lucky with the weather." The vastness of the Montana wilderness stretched around them, beautiful and indifferent to their plight. Olivia hugged her knees to her chest, overwhelmed by the feeling that she was dragging Yancy into danger that wasn't his to face. "You should go back," she said suddenly. "This is my fight, not yours. You've done enough." Yancy turned to look at her, surprise evident in his features. "I'm not leaving you alone out here." "Why?" she demanded, a mix of gratitude and frustration in her voice. "Why risk your life for a woman you barely know?" Yancy was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she had to strain to hear it. 3 years ago, I had a sister, Kate. She married a man who turned out to be no good violent when he drank, which was often. She tried to leave him. He paused, his jaw working. No one helped her. Not neighbors, not the law. Said it was a private matter between husband and wife. She didn't make it. The simple, devastating story hung in the air between them. "I'm sorry," Olivia whispered. "I swore after that I'd never turn away from someone who needed help," Yancy continued, "especially a woman facing violence. So no, Mrs. Rose, I won't be going back. Not until I know you're safe." The raw honesty in his words stripped away any further argument. Olivia simply nodded, understanding now what drove this quiet man to such extraordinary lengths on her behalf. They continued their journey as the day waned, making camp in a sheltered hollow as darkness fell. With only one bedroll between them, Yancy insisted Olivia take it while he kept watch, his rifle across his knees. As she drifted toward sleep, Olivia found herself watching him through half-closed eyes. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strength in his profile and the weariness in his eyes. This man had saved her life multiple times, had shared his painful past with her, and was now risking everything to see her to safety. In that moment, something shifted in her heart, not love, not yet, but a seed of something that might one day grow into it. "Yes," she said softly into the night. Yancy turned, brow furrowed in confusion. "Madam, your proposal, the marriage of convenience, I accept." Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something harder to read. "You don't have to decide now, Mrs. Rose. We're not thinking clearly after today." "I am thinking clearly for the first time in weeks," Olivia countered. "You were right about the protection it would offer. And I trust you, Mr. Blackburn. I know you'll honor your word about it being in name only." Yancy studied her face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "If you're sure, then when we reach Fort Benton, we'll find a preacher." With that understanding between them, Olivia finally surrendered to exhaustion, her dreams for once free of the violence that had shattered her world. Dawn broke with a sound that froze the blood in their veins' hoofbeats, approaching rapidly from the south. Yancy was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Riders coming, at least 3, he said tersely. "Get to the horses, now." They mounted quickly, abandoning the remains of their small camp. Yancy led them deeper into the forest, following game trails that wound through the dense undergrowth. The sounds of pursuit faded and then returned, growing closer with each passing minute. "They're tracking us," Yancy muttered. "Professional trackers, not just ranch hands." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. "What do we do?" Yancy's eyes scanned the terrain ahead, calculating. "There's a river about 2 miles north. If we can reach it, we can use the water to hide our trail." They pushed their tired horses hard, breaking from the trees into a rocky meadow that sloped down toward a fast-moving river. They were halfway across the open ground when the first shot rang out. "Ride!" Yancy shouted, urging his horse forward as a bullet kicked up dirt near his mount's hooves. Olivia bent low over her horse's neck, terror lending her strength as they galloped for the river. More shots followed, But the distance and their movement made accurate aim impossible. They hit the water at a full gallop, the horses struggling against the current as they forded the river. On the far bank, Yancy led them downstream for several hundred yards before cutting back into the forest. Only then did they slow, listening intently for sounds of pursuit. "Did we lose them?" Olivia gasped, her body trembling with adrenaline. "For now," Yancy replied grimly. "But they'll cross eventually. We need to keep moving." They traveled all day, pushing deeper into the wilderness, alternating between trotting and walking to spare the horses. By nightfall, they had reached a series of rocky bluffs that offered some protection and a vantage point to watch for pursuers. "We'll rest here for a few hours," Yancy decided. "The horses can't go much further without proper rest." They made a cold camp, not risking a fire that might be spotted. Sharing the last of their jerky and hardtack, they sat close together for warmth as the mountain night turned bitterly cold. "Do you think they're still following?" Olivia asked, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. "Rutherford doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily," Yancy replied honestly. "But we've gained some ground. With luck, we'll reach Fort Benton before they catch up." Olivia shivered, not entirely from the cold. "Why does he want me dead so badly? I didn't even see which of his men shot Richard." "You're a witness to murder," Yancy said. "In Rutherford's world, that makes you a threat. Men like him don't tolerate threats." They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts as the stars wheeled overhead. Despite her exhaustion, Olivia found sleep elusive, her mind replaying the terror of the day's chase. Beside her, Yancy remained vigilant, his body tense with readiness, even as fatigue etched lines around his eyes. "You should sleep," she said softly. "I can keep watch for a while." Yancy shook his head. "I'm fine. You haven't slept in over a day. You're no good to either of us if you collapse from exhaustion." After a brief internal struggle, he nodded. "Wake me in 2 hours." He stretched out on the ground, using his saddle as a pillow, his rifle within easy reach. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Olivia watched him in the starlight, noting how even in rest, a certain tension remained in his features. This man had taken on her burden as his own, and the weight of that responsibility never fully left him. 2 hours later, when she gently touched his shoulder to wake him, Yancy's hand closed around her wrist before his eyes even opened a reflexive action born of years spent in dangerous territory. "Sorry," he muttered, immediately releasing her. "Old habits." "It's all right," she assured him. "Everything's quiet. No sign of pursuit." They switched places, with Olivia taking what rest she could while Yancy resumed his vigil. When dawn lightened the eastern sky, they were already moving again, following a game trail that wound through the high country. By midday, the terrain began to change, the mountains giving way to rolling hills as they approached the Missouri River Valley. In the distance, they caught glimpses of Fort Benton, the busy river port that served as a gateway to the Northern Territories. "We'll approach from the east," Yancy decided. "Less chance of being spotted that way." Fort Benton was a bustling settlement, with steamboats docked along the river and wagons coming and going from the various trading posts. They entered town cautiously, Yancy's eyes constantly scanning for potential threats as they made their way to a modest house on the outskirts. Martha Nelson Winters, Jacob's sister, was a stern-faced woman with kind eyes who asked no questions as she ushered them inside. Only when they were seated at her kitchen table with hot coffee before them did she speak. "Jacob sent word you might be coming," she said. "Said you were in trouble with Blake Rutherford." "Mrs. Rose witnessed something Rutherford wants buried," Yancy explained. "We need a safe place for a few days while we figure out our next move." Martha nodded. "You can stay as long as needed. Spare room upstairs is yours." She paused, studying Olivia's worn face. "You look dead on your feet, child. Why don't you get some rest while Mr. Blackburn fills me in on the details?" Gratefully, Olivia accepted the offer, climbing the stairs to find a small but comfortable bedroom with a real bed, a luxury after days on the trail. Despite her intention to just rest briefly, She fell into a deep sleep the moment her head touched the pillow. When she woke, the room was bathed in the golden light of sunset. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, but then memory returned. Fort Benton, Martha Winters, safety, at least for now. Downstairs, she found Yancy and Martha deep in conversation at the kitchen table. "There he is," Martha was saying. "Preacher Jones. Peculiar man, but he can perform a legal marriage." Olivia realized they were discussing the marriage of convenience she had agreed to. The reality of it suddenly struck her. She was about to become Yancy Blackburn's wife, not out of love, but necessity. The thought brought a complicated mix of emotions. "Mrs. Rose," Yancy acknowledged her presence, standing as she entered. "Hope you got some rest." "Best sleep I've had in days," she admitted. "Have there been any developments?" "No sign of Rutherford's men in town," Yancy replied. "But that could change. Martha's been helping me with arrangements." "For the wedding," Olivia said quietly. Martha glanced between them, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "I'll leave you two to talk. Supper will be ready in an hour." When they were alone, an awkward silence fell between them. It was Yancy who finally broke it. "We don't have to do this," he said. "There might be other ways to ensure your safety." Olivia shook her head. "We've been through this. It's the most practical solution." "Practical?" Yancy repeated, a shadow crossing his features. "Yes, I suppose it is." Something in his tone made Olivia look at him more closely. "Is there something else troubling you, Mr. Blackburn?" Yancy hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "I want to be clear about something. This arrangement is for your protection. I don't expect." He stopped, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Understanding dawned on Olivia. "You're concerned about the marital aspects." A flush crept up Yancy's neck. "I would never presume. That's not why I suggested this." "I know that," Olivia said softly. "And I appreciate your consideration. This will be a marriage in name only, for as long as necessary." The relief on his face was palpable, though something else flickered in his eyes, something that might have been disappointment, quickly masked. "Then we're in agreement. Martha says the preacher can see us tomorrow morning." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Olivia found her thoughts turning not to Richard, as they usually did, but to Yancy Blackburn. Tomorrow she would become his wife, binding her life to his through words spoken before God and witnesses. It was a strange fate for a woman who had once dreamed of a simple homesteader's life with the man she loved. Yet, as she drifted toward sleep, she realized that for the first time since Richard's death, she was thinking of the future rather than the past. Whether that future held anything beyond mere survival remained to be seen. But it was a start. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. Martha provided Olivia with a clean dress, not white, but a soft blue that brought out the color of her eyes. There were no flowers, no attendants, no celebration beyond Martha's quiet presence as they made their way to the small church on the edge of town. Preacher Jones was indeed a peculiar man, rail-thin with bushy eyebrows that seemed to have a life of their own. He raised those eyebrows questioningly when Yancy explained they wanted to be married immediately, but asked no prying questions. The ceremony was brief and solemn. Olivia felt a strange detachment as she repeated the vows, as though she were watching someone else promise to love, honor, and cherish Yancy Blackburn until death parted them. Only when he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, purchased that morning from the general store, did reality snap back into focus. This was happening. She was becoming Mrs. Blackburn. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yancy hesitated only briefly before leaning in to place a chaste kiss on her lips. It was fleeting, proper, yet Olivia felt an unexpected warmth spread through her at the contact. Outside the church, Martha hugged them both. "Congratulations. It's not the wedding most girls dream of, but it's binding in the eyes of God and the law." "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Winters," Olivia said sincerely. "It's Martha to you now, dear. We're family of sorts." They walked back to Martha's house in companionable silence, the gold band foreign and heavy on Olivia's finger. She was married again, a widow no longer. The thought brought both relief and a pang of guilt, as though she had somehow betrayed Richard's memory. That afternoon, as Martha busied herself with household chores, Yancy approached Olivia with a serious expression. "I've been thinking about our next move," he said. "Fort Benton is safe for now, but eventually word will reach Rutherford that we're here." "What are our options?" Olivia asked, already dreading the answer. "We could keep running, try to lose ourselves in one of the bigger settlements, Helena, maybe, or even Salt Lake City." He paused, studying her reaction. "Or we could stand and fight." Surprise registered on Olivia's face. "Fight? How?" "Rutherford's power comes from fear and corruption," Yancy explained. "But even he's not above the law entirely. If we could get evidence of his crimes before a federal judge, not just a local sheriff in his pocket." Hope flickered in Olivia's heart for the first time in weeks. "What kind of evidence?" "Witnesses, documentation of land theft, proof of murder." Yancy's expression hardened. "It won't be easy and it's risky, but it might be the only way to truly be free of him." Olivia considered this, weighing the danger against the prospect of a lifetime spent looking over her shoulder. "How would we even begin?" "I know people," Yancy said, "former lawmen, honest judges, and I've heard rumors that a federal marshal has been quietly building a case against Rutherford for months. We'd need to find him. Offer your testimony." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. To actively fight back against the man who had destroyed her life, rather than simply running from him, there was power in that thought. "What about you?" she asked softly. "This isn't your fight, yet you keep risking everything." Yancy's gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. "It became my fight the moment I found you hiding in that cave. And now," he glanced at the ring on her finger, "now we're bound together, for better or worse." Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening of connection that went beyond their pragmatic arrangement. Olivia found herself reaching for his hand, squeezing it gently in wordless gratitude. "Then we fight," she said firmly. "Together." The decision made. They spent the next few days gathering information and making discreet inquiries. Martha's house became their base of operations, with Yancy venturing into town to meet with contacts, while Olivia remained safely hidden. A week after their wedding, Yancy returned from town with news. "Federal Marshal James Harker," he announced without preamble, "currently in Helena, gathering evidence against Rutherford and several other cattle barons who've been terrorizing homesteaders." Olivia's heart quickened. "You found him?" "Better. He's coming here. One of my contacts got word to him about your situation. He'll arrive by steamboat in 3 days." The prospect of finally having the law real law, not corrupted by Rutherford's influence on their side, filled Olivia with nervous anticipation. For 3 days, she alternated between hope and dread, imagining all that could go right or wrong when the marshal arrived. On the appointed day, Yancy went to meet the steamboat alone, insisting it was safer for Olivia to remain at Martha's house. The hours of waiting stretched interminably, each creak of the floorboards or distant hoofbeat sending her heart racing. When Yancy finally returned, he was accompanied by a tall, broad-shouldered man with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Marshal Harker moved with the careful precision of a man accustomed to danger, his gaze sweeping the room as he entered. "Mrs. Blackburn," he greeted her formally, "your husband has told me some of your story. I'd like to hear the rest from you directly." For the next hour, Olivia recounted everything her life with Richard on the homestead, the escalating tensions with the Double R Ranch, the day she found her husband murdered, and her subsequent flight. The marshal listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small book. "And you're certain it was Double R men who killed your husband?" he asked when she had finished. "Absolutely certain," Olivia affirmed. "I recognized their brand, and later in Eagles Pass, I saw one of the men who'd been there that day." Marshal Harker nodded thoughtfully. "Your testimony corroborates what I've heard from other homesteaders who've been run off their land. Rutherford's been getting bolder, thinking himself untouchable. Is he? Yancy asked bluntly. Untouchable? No man is above the law, Harker replied, though his expression was grim. But bringing down someone like Rutherford requires more than just testimony. We need documentation proof of his methods, his orders to his men. Which would be at his ranch, Olivia said, understanding the challenge. Precisely, and that fortress is well guarded. Yancy leaned forward, his expression intense. What if we could get someone inside? Someone Rutherford wouldn't suspect. The marshal raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Rutherford doesn't know what I look like, Yancy said. He's hunting for Olivia, not me. I could pose as a drifting cowhand looking for work. Absolutely not, Olivia interjected, fear gripping her heart. It's too dangerous. It's our best chance, Yancy countered. If I can get hired on, gain access to his officer records. And if you're discovered, Olivia demanded, they'll kill you without hesitation. Yancy's expression softened as he looked at her. I know the risks, but I also know how to handle myself. Marshal Harker studied them both, his experienced eyes noting the concern in Olivia's face and the determination in Yancy's. It's not a bad plan, he admitted. Risky, yes, but potentially effective. I could provide you with specific information on what to look for. You can't seriously be considering this, Olivia appealed to the marshal. Mrs. Blackburn, I understand your concern, Harker said gently. But your husband is right. This might be our best opportunity to gather the evidence we need. The use of husband reminded Olivia of the strange reality they now inhabited, legally bound as spouses, though their relationship had been born of necessity rather than love. Yet the fear that gripped her at the thought of Yancy walking into Rutherford's lair felt very real, very wifely. At least let me come with you, she said desperately. I could... Absolutely not, Yancy cut her off. Rutherford knows your face. The moment you were spotted, we'd both be dead. The truth of this silenced her protests, though her heart still rebelled at the plan. As the men continued to discuss details, Olivia excused herself, needing space to process her emotions. In the small garden behind Martha's house, she tried to make sense of the turmoil inside her. Why did the thought of Yancy putting himself in danger affect her so deeply? Was it mere gratitude for all he'd done, or had something more developed during their time together, something she wasn't ready to acknowledge even to herself? The back door opened and Yancy stepped out, his expression concerned. Olivia, are you all right? It was the first time he'd used her given name, she realized with a start. Always before it had been Mrs. Rose or, more recently, Mrs. Blackburn. I don't want you to do this, she said honestly. It's too dangerous. Yancy moved to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. I understand your concern, but this isn't just about bringing Rutherford to justice for what he did to your husband. It's about stopping him from doing the same to others. And if something happens to you, what then? The question emerged more plaintively than she'd intended. Yancy turned to look at her, surprise evident in his features. I didn't realize my welfare concerned you so greatly, Mrs. Olivia. Heat rose in her cheeks. Of course it does. You've risked everything for me, and now we're married. A complicated expression crossed Yancy's face. A marriage of convenience, as you said. In name only. Yes, but Olivia faltered, uncertain how to express the confusing emotions swirling within her. That doesn't mean I want to see you hurt. Or worse. Yancy studied her face for a long moment, something softening in his gaze. I promise to be careful. This isn't my first dangerous undertaking. But it's the first one you've attempted with a wife waiting for you, Olivia pointed out softly. The word wife hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to fully explore. Yancy's hand moved as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. I'll come back, he said simply. You have my word. 2 days later, Yancy prepared to depart. The plan was carefully constructed. He would travel to a town near Rutherford's range, present himself as a cowhand looking for work, and hopefully get hired on at the Double R. Meanwhile, Olivia would remain safely hidden with Martha, while Marshal Harker continued gathering testimony from other victims of Rutherford's land grabbing. The morning of Yancy's departure was crisp and clear. He checked his gear methodically, his movements efficient and focused. Olivia watched from the doorway, her heart heavy with dread. "The marshal says 2 weeks," Yancy reminded her. "If I haven't made contact by then, he'll implement the contingency plan." Olivia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The contingency plan involved bringing in federal troops, but by then, it might be too late for Yancy. As he prepared to mount his horse, Olivia stepped forward impulsively. "Wait." Yancy turned, questioning. Without allowing herself to think too much about it, Olivia reached up and pulled his head down to hers, pressing her lips firmly against his. It was nothing like the brief, chaste kiss they had shared at their wedding. This was something else entirely, a declaration, a plea, a promise. When she pulled away, Yancy stared at her in astonishment, his usual composure momentarily shattered. "Come back to me," Olivia whispered. For a moment, Yancy seemed at a loss for words, then his expression shifted, determination replacing surprise. "Count on it," he said softly. With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, not looking back. Olivia watched until he disappeared from sight, her fingers unconsciously touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss still lingered. Martha appeared beside her, a knowing look in her eyes. "Not such a marriage of convenience after all, is it?" Olivia flushed. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," Martha replied gently. "It's written all over your face when you look at him." "It's complicated," Olivia said, unwilling to examine her feelings too closely. "Love usually is," Martha agreed, "especially when it comes at an unexpected time, in unexpected circumstances." Love. The word sent a jolt through Olivia. Was that what she was feeling for Yancy? So soon after losing Richard? The guilt that accompanied the thought was immediate and crushing. Martha seemed to read her mind. "Loving again doesn't dishonor what you had before," she said softly. "Your heart isn't a finite resource, my dear." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "I'm so confused. Everything's happened so fast." "Give yourself time," Martha advised, "but don't deny what's growing between you and Yancy. Life's too short and too precious for that." The days that followed passed with agonizing slowness. Olivia tried to keep busy helping Martha around the house, but her thoughts were constantly with Yancy, imagining all manner of dangers he might be facing. Each night she dreamed of him, sometimes in peril, sometimes returning safely to her arms. She woke from the latter dreams with a confusing mix of longing and guilt. A week into Yancy's absence, Marshal Harker brought news. "He's in," he announced without preamble. "Got word through one of my informants. Yancy's been hired as a ranch hand at the Double R." Relief washed over Olivia. "Has he found anything yet?" "Nothing specific, but he's gaining Rutherford's trust. Apparently he broke up a fight between two hands and impressed the foreman with his handling of it." It was something at least. Yancy was alive and making progress. The knowledge allowed Olivia to breathe a little easier, though anxiety still gnawed at her. Another week passed with no further news. The deadline Yancy had established was approaching rapidly, and Olivia found herself growing more agitated with each passing day. She took to standing on Martha's porch for hours, scanning the horizon for any sign of a returning rider. On the morning of the 14th day, just as hope was beginning to wane, a cloud of dust appeared on the road from town. Olivia's heart leapt into her throat as she strained to make out the approaching figure. It was a single rider, moving at a steady pace. "Martha!" she called out, her voice trembling. "Someone's coming!" The older woman joined her on the porch, squinting into the distance. "Can't tell who it is yet. Best get inside just in case." But Olivia couldn't move, her eyes fixed on the approaching horseman. As he drew closer, familiar features came into focus, the set of the shoulders, the way he sat the saddle. "It's him," she breathed. "It's Yancy." Without conscious thought, she was running down the path toward him, her skirts gathered in her hands. Yancy saw her coming and urged his horse to a trot, closing the distance between them. He dismounted just as she reached him, and then she was in his arms, held tight against his chest as though he would never let her go. Olivia breathed in his scent leather, hoarse, and something essentially Yancy, and felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "You're back," she murmured into his shirt. "You're safe." Yancy's arms tightened around her. "I gave you my word," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. Pulling back slightly, Olivia examined his face. A new scar marked his jaw, and fatigue lined his features, but his eyes were bright and alive with something she hadn't seen before. "Did you find what the marshal needed?" she asked. A slow smile spread across Yancy's face. "More than that. I found Rutherford's ledger, every transaction, every bribe, every order to run off homesteaders, and letters, Olivia. Letters ordering his men to deal with your husband specifically." The significance of this took a moment to register. I mean Rutherford is finished," Yancy confirmed. "The marshal already has the evidence. He's organizing a federal posse as we speak." Joy and vindication surged through Olivia, along with a bittersweet pang. Justice for Richard was finally within reach, yet it wouldn't bring him back. Nothing could. As if sensing her conflicted emotions, Yancy's expression softened. "There's something else," he said, taking her hands in his. "Something I realized while I was away." Olivia looked up at him questioningly. "This marriage between us," Yancy continued, his voice low and earnest. "It started as a practical arrangement, a matter of protection." "Yes," Olivia agreed cautiously, unsure where he was heading. "But that's not what it is to me anymore." Yancy's grip on her hands tightened slightly. "Being away from you these past weeks, all I could think about was getting back to you. Not because of duty or obligation, but because—" He paused, seemingly gathering courage. "Because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, Olivia." The declaration hung in the air between them, momentous and irrevocable. Olivia stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "I know it's too soon," Yancy rushed on. "I know you're still grieving Richard, and I would never presume to replace him in your heart, but I wanted you to know the truth. Whatever happens next, whether Rutherford is brought to justice or not, my feelings for you won't change." Olivia felt tears welling in her eyes again, but for an entirely different reason. The confusion and guilt that had plagued her these past weeks suddenly crystallized into clarity. She did love this man, this quiet, honorable cowboy who had risked everything for her, who had held her through her grief, who had given her hope when all seemed lost. "It's not too soon," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "I don't know how or when it happened, but somewhere between Eagles Pass and here, I fell in love with you too, Yancy Blackburn." The wonder that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Yancy lowered his head and captured her lips with his. Unlike their previous kisses, the chaste one at their wedding, the desperate one before his departure, this one was slow and deep, a true communion of hearts. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Yancy rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find this," he murmured. "Not out here, not in this life." "Nor I," Olivia admitted. "Especially not after losing Richard. But life has strange ways of bringing us what we need, even when we think all hope is gone." They stood together in the dusty road, holding each other as though they'd never let go. Their journey was far from over. Rutherford still needed to be brought to justice, their future still needed to be determined, but in that moment they had found something precious and unexpected. A second chance at love. 2 weeks later, the news reached Fort Benton. Blake Rutherford had been arrested by federal marshals along with several of his men. The evidence Yancy had provided, combined with testimony from multiple homesteaders, had been overwhelming. The cattle baron's reign of terror was over. For Olivia, the news brought a sense of completion. Richard had been avenged, and while nothing could bring him back, she could honor his memory by living fully and openly in the life that now stretched before her. That evening, as she and Yancy sat on Martha's porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues, Olivia felt a deep contentment settle over her. "What happens now?" she asked, her head resting comfortably on Yancy's shoulder. He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Whatever we want, I suppose. We could stay in this area, maybe start a small ranch of our own, or head further west, California maybe, or Oregon." "A fresh start," Olivia mused. "I'd like that." Yancy turned to look at her, his expression serious. "There's something I've been thinking about. Our marriage, it was performed under unusual circumstances, for practical reasons." Olivia tensed slightly. "Are you having regrets?" "Just the opposite," Yancy assured her quickly. "What I'm trying to say, not very well, is that I'd like to do it properly. Renew our vows, but this time with the right intentions, not out of necessity, but out of love." Relief and joy flooded through Olivia. "I'd like that very much." "And after that," Yancy continued, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "I thought perhaps we might start a family. If you're ready for that, of course." The idea of children, something she had dreamed of with Richard but never achieved, sent a warm glow spreading through Olivia's chest. "I think I'd like that too. Very much." Yancy's arm tightened around her shoulders, drawing her closer. "You know, that first day when I found you in that cave, one of the ranch hands warned me about getting involved." "She still cries for him," they said. Olivia remembered those early days of raw grief when tears had seemed her only companion. "They weren't wrong." "No, they weren't," Yancy agreed. "And I told them, then I'll hold her through it." He turned to meet her gaze. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. Whatever comes, whatever joy or sorrow life brings us, I'll be right here beside you." In that moment, as the last light of day gilded the Montana landscape, Olivia Rose Blackburn understood that love wasn't a finite resource to be expended once and never again. It was a wellspring, capable of renewal even after the deepest drought. Richard would always have a place in her heart, but that heart had proven capacious enough to embrace a new love, unexpected and profound. "And I'll be beside you," she promised, sealing the vow with a kiss as twilight deepened around them. 1 year later, on a sunny spring morning, Olivia stood on the porch of their small ranch house, watching as Yancy mended a fence in the distance. Their property wasn't large, just 80 acres nestled in a fertile valley with a clear stream running through it. But it was theirs, purchased with the reward money from Rutherford's capture. They had renewed their vows 6 months earlier in a proper ceremony, with Martha and Jacob Nelson in attendance, along with friends they'd made in their new community. This time, Olivia had worn white, and Yancy had looked at her with such love in his eyes that she'd nearly wept with happiness. Now, as she rested one hand on her swelling belly, feeling the flutter of new life within, Olivia reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her here. Loss and grief had nearly destroyed her, but they had also, improbably, brought her to this new beginning. Yancy looked up from his work, catching sight of her on the porch. Even at a distance, she could see his face light up with that smile he reserved only for her. He set down his tools and started walking toward the house, his stride purposeful and eager. As he approached, Olivia felt the baby kick a strong movement that made her laugh with surprise. Yancy reached her just in time to place his hand on her belly and feel the second kick. "Active today," he remarked, wonder in his voice. "She takes after her father," Olivia teased, "always in motion." "She?" Yancy raised an eyebrow. "You sound mighty certain," Olivia smiled mysteriously. "Just a feeling." Yancy knelt before her, pressing a gentle kiss to her rounded abdomen. "Boy or girl, doesn't matter to me, as long as they have your spirit." "And your kindness," Olivia added, running her fingers through his hair. Rising to his feet, Yancy gathered her carefully into his arms. "Are you happy, Olivia? Truly?" The question was one he asked periodically, as though still amazed that fate had brought them together. Each time her answer was the same, but today it carried special weight as they stood together on the threshold of parenthood. Happier than I ever thought possible, she assured him. And it was the simple truth. The grief that had once threatened to consume her had softened over time, transformed into a gentle remembrance rather than a searing pain. She still thought of Richard sometimes, but without the desperate anguish of those early days. You know, Yancy said thoughtfully, sometimes I think about that day I found you in the cave, how close I came to riding past without stopping. But you did stop, Olivia reminded him. That's what matters. Because I heard you crying, he admitted. And something in that sound, I couldn't ignore it. Olivia reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar on his jaw that he'd earned while gathering evidence against Rutherford. And you held me through it, just as you promised. Always will, Yancy vowed, bending to kiss her with a tenderness that still took her breath away. For as long as we both shall live. As the Montana spring bloomed around them, promising new beginnings and endless possibilities, Olivia felt the rightness of their journey together. From darkness had come light, from despair, hope, from loss, a love that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. For as long as we both shall live, she echoed, knowing with absolute certainty that some vows, spoken from the heart, could never be broken.